What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Guys, some Colts players had some very interesting comments to say about this Indianapolis Colts team. But before we discuss what they actually said, just want to let you guys know that this episode is presented by PrizePicks. Be sure to visit PrizePicks.com, download the app today, and use code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. All right, so 3 noticeable players. And Cody, you're going to witness a theme here. All 3 of these players are on the defense. So just key note of that before we dive into these words. I'm going to read all of these words, Cody, and then when I finish all 3 of them, I'll let you go ahead and spew what you got to say. Most recent one was from Julian Blackmon here. So he said, from my standpoint, I feel like it's hard for me to call out names or anything like that, but there's definitely more than what meets the eye, Blackmon said. It definitely bleeds over to what happens in games. You see the same things in practice that we see on Sundays, and it's no surprise, but it's frustrating. It says it's frustrating to be a defense that takes the ball away, do everything that we can, but that's what we signed up for. We've got to continue to try to do that, figure out an identity that we believe in as a team in order to turn this thing around. So that was Colts safety Julian Blackmon. That's one defensive player. Now, another star defensive player, one of your captains, and this was linebacker Zaire Franklin, and said, there's guys on the team that need to learn how to raise their level of play. Says, when you get to this time in the season with so much film out there, it's not to say practice isn't important. Practice is definitely important, but preparation takes hold in many different aspects. With us having such a late bye and with so many guys banged up, preparation might not always be practice. It might be how much time you spend in the building, how much time you spend in the meeting rooms, how much you're doing to perfect your craft. And then the last piece here, and there's a couple different, there's not an actual breakdown of the words that Kenny Moore said, who's also a captain on the team. But main part is, he says, I don't want to sugarcoat it, and says, I don't think everybody is working as hard as possible, and it's obviously showing. And said, year to year, it is the same thing. Now, Cody, I mean, you're seeing all three of these kind of echoing the same words, but they seem to have a little bit different meaning behind every single one of them. Your thoughts on Julian Blackmon's words when he says bleeding over into games and talking about how frustrating it is as a defense to do what they do, and the identity of the team seems to be uncertain.
Yeah, I think the immediate question is who is he talking about specifically? Are there any certain players that he's referring to, where it's bleeding over into games? You try to think, okay, who are some of the players on? I'm assuming he's talking about the offense. So who are the players on offense that you're it's just not translating? I'm kind of curious, who would those be in your mind? Because I have a couple in mind, but I'm curious, Derek, who would you say? Sorry to flip it back on you, but who are the players that you would say have not lived up to the standard?
I mean, if you want to talk about a guy that says that they go by the standard but aren't, Ryan Kelly would be one of them.
That's what I'm
saying. I don't know, because
it's over because years.
Zaire Franklin's words kind of bleed a little bit more into this point, which we're going to talk about here in a second. But for me specifically, again, he's saying that the preparation is not there. And it's telling that he was going off on a tangent for a split second and talking about it's frustrating to be a defense that takes the ball away, does everything we can. Like he mentions the defense doing everything that they can. Has to mean somebody on the offense. He has to be talking about that side of the ball not putting as much effort into it as what the defense is. Now, that could also mean just that, what they're seeing in practice is not what they're seeing in the games. But I mean, it's clear, Cody, we've been seeing it recently. The last 4 weeks, the defense has carried this team. They have. The offense has been terrible for most of the year. And through a lot of different people's faults, it's not one particular person. It's the whole offensive side and coaching staff's fault. But who is he referring to?
Is it less about a player, and is it more about just that word that we've talked about of accountability? There is none on the offense. There's absolutely none on the offense. And it's not just a Shane Steichen thing. It's been a Frank Reich thing. It's been the standard, right? It's like nobody gets held accountable for what they do, Like you pay, like you said, we pay Ryan Kelly what you pay him, and then, look at what the result is. I mean, how many seasons of the last couple has he played well below the standard, but he's still starting, he's still at his starting spot. You talk about, I don't even know, like some of these other players, like you even think like some of the wide receivers in the last couple of years, like I know the wide receivers, I do feel like Derek, the wide receivers did play pretty well today, but like, what about some of those, young guys? Like, like over the years, why aren't some of these guys necessarily getting better? I do wonder if that's part of it as well. When it comes to it, I don't know what the answer is.
And I will say this, Cody. I don't know. I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm just thinking of this. Like, I'm sure the defense probably sees it because they rewatch stuff like this. Yeah. I mean, you can't tell me also that, like, again, the offense turns the ball over a lot. And it's not even just the quarterbacks. It's, I mean, again, Cody, you and I, we watched the game film. We watched the clips of, you remember that Houston game where we saw, 8 drops from wide receivers? 4 of them were touchdowns had they would have caught them, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you think that doesn't get disappointing as a defense to watch these guys continuously drop touchdowns and then have to put the flack on their backs because they can't do their jobs on Sundays? Like, again, people in your average fan is not going to understand it. And they don't want to understand it because they don't want to put the blame on every person on the team. They only want to put the blame on 2 or 3 particular people that they have their narrative about. But I've been telling you, and you know it too, Anthony Richardson, albeit hadn't done great this year, but you and I kept talking about it. Accountability. Where's the accountability for all the wide receivers who keep dropping passes this year? Or the running backs that keep dropping touchdown passes? Or the offensive linemen that keep committing penalties every single time that stall drives? Where's the accountability on Shane Steichen, who's not calling good offensive game plans? Right? Like, where's the accountability on one side versus the other?
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned Matt Gay as well. Where's the accountability at kicker? There's none because you paid a guy. And the Colts are too prideful to admit, like, oh, maybe he's just not a good kicker. And maybe we made a mistake. It's just been that, man, for way too long, I think, with this organization. And I think players are sick of it. I mean, Derek, how many times I feel like, with a lot of these guys, with Blackman, Kenny Moore, Zaire, they've been on this team for a while. A lot of them have been here. Blackman came, I guess, the latest in 2020. But like a lot of these guys, they've been here pretty much the entirety of the Chris Ballard tenure, and nothing has changed, Derek. It's the same crap. It's like a different issue, but it's the same at the core of it all. It's the same crap every single year. Mm-hmm. There's something that's just not being held accountable. And I just think that's been the standard for this team. And I think, Derek, in a lot of ways, that's why this team, has been so subpar for so many years. Is like they say that word, but they don't actually enforce it. unless it's convenient, unless it spins a narrative, and unless it saves jobs.
And
Honestly, that's what they do.
yeah. And I remember watching your video earlier in the week about, Jeff Saturday going on TV and saying, like, this feels like somebody covering somebody's job.
Yep.
And that certainly sounds like something about Ballard, and it certainly could. I know we were talking with Shad, Zach, and Steven after the game, and somebody was saying how it felt like this was a move by Ballard to try to convince everyone that, they could win now with Joe Flacco. And, it improved to everyone that Anthony Richardson still needs time to develop. But now they've shot themselves in the foot because they did that. And now you're seeing that Flacco is clearly not the answer. And now it just shows you didn't have any answer at quarterback and your team still is struggling. So, I mean, it definitely feels like trying to cover one's butt right now.
For
And
sure.
to your piggybacking off of the year-to-year thing, we can go to Kenny Moore's comments. I'll go with Zaire's last. Yeah, Kenny Moore, he was one of the first ones to mention it. I mean, he calls it out, and kudos to him for actually being willing to say something. I mean, he said it year to year, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And I I think Cody, I'm willing to finally admit it. I'm willing to firmly go on the record. I've never once said this sentence with 100% conviction and 100% willingness to say it in my voice. I am 100% committed to Chris Ballard being fired at the end of the season as the GM of the Indianapolis Colts. I am, because
Welcome to the club.
you have your team captains telling you, who have been here for 5 years, for over half of your tenure, that it's the same crap every year that happens with this team. There's no accountability, there's no standard, there's no ability for these players to grasp onto something and, be able to hold some accountability for themselves. And I mean, your own guys are saying it now. For how many times now? I mean, we had this with Frank Reich, and now we're in our second year with Steichen, and we're already having it. Like, it might mean that there's something more than just the head coaches. That's the problem here.
Well, guys, with football season finally getting back into the swing of things, first off, we rejoice. But also, guys, when it comes to PrizePicks, this is going to be a great way for you guys, especially, to check out some of the stuff that PrizePicks has.
You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You heard me right. Only 4 correct picks. You can win 100 times your money, guys, on PrizePicks. Be sure to sign up today and get $50 off instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. So, for example, if you think Jonathan Taylor is going to have another performance of 80-plus yards rushing, you might be sitting pretty good with where you feel like the Colts are right now.
So if you're looking specifically for the Colts stuff, that's definitely something you guys should check out. But if you're looking for, like me, more NFL stuff, there's all sorts of stats and stuff that you can check out and make your picks. And there's definitely guys that are very consistent, like Jonathan Taylor against the Houston Texans, that you really feel like you can probably feel pretty good about overall, right? And there's some other ones where you're like, I don't know if I would take the over on that. I don't know if I would pick them to hit that margin, right? So, guys, be sure to go check out all that stuff on PrizePicks. It's only a couple examples. There's all the different odds that you could hope for when it comes to that for PrizePicks. So I encourage you guys to go check that out, but definitely excited for this season, and hopefully you guys will be following along with us and everything with PrizePicks and what they do.
So be sure to download the app today. Use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the PrizePicks app today. Use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Like I said, guys, it's a great way to continue to stay in with week to week life of the NFL, specifically with your favorite team, the Indianapolis Colts. So be sure to do that. Be sure to check out PrizePicks. And remember, PrizePicks, run your game.
I'm like, Chris Ballard has scapegoated everybody. I mean, really, he has, right? You've scapegoated, all the quarterbacks. You've scapegoated, your entire former coaching staff. At the end of the day, Derek, it's got to be something. Like, you're the common denominator here, Chris Ballard. You have done nothing to improve this football team. Absolutely nothing. Here's what I'm going to go on a rant here, Derek.
Go ahead.
You have used the crutch of Andrew Luck for far too long, and you have cockroached your way, Chris Ballard, into being on this team far longer than you should have been. You convinced a lot of us, including us, that the team was headed in the right direction. We were foolish for believing that, Derek. We'll admit that.
Yep.
But it's no more. It's coming to light. Chris Ballard is the problem with this team.
He's one
He is
of
the
them.
problem.
Probably one of the biggest, if not
one
the
of
biggest.
the biggest, if not the biggest. Now, of course, you can talk about Jim Irsay. Jim Irsay definitely has a hand in this as well. But, Derek, I keep coming back to it time and time again. Since 2017, Chris Ballard has not won the division. Chris Ballard has not won a week one game. Chris Ballard has a losing record. Chris Ballard has not won in Jacksonville. And he's won one playoff game with a 39-year-old quarterback. Yep. And also, I'll throw this in here as well. He has not found a franchise quarterback. And he's really not tried up into Anthony Richardson, which should be an indictment right there on Chris Ballard as well. This dude is ignorant, and this dude is full of himself. His ego has cost this team the last half of a decade, if not longer.
Yeah.
It really has. And we've said it year after year. We've been so tired of this team sitting on their hands, trusting in their own guys, when this is the result again, Derek. You can only blame so many other people until you have to look inwardly and say, maybe I'm the problem. Chris Ballard, you are the problem. You are the problem. And like you said, Derek, the guys that you literally doubled down on, the guys that you brought in are your homegrown guys are saying this. Yep. Your homegrown guys that you're saying, we're not going to sign any outside guys. These are our guys. They are calling you out right now. And if I'm Jim Irsay, I don't need any more proof. He's gone. He has to be. There's no way this team continues on with Chris Ballard as the GM. It's reached its course. It's done. There is nothing more to do if you're the Indianapolis Colts when it comes to Chris Ballard. He has dug his own grave. He's probably dug his own grave a lot deeper, I think, than he should have been allowed to. But Jim Irsay, again, the loyalty thing, it's a problem with Jim Irsay. We saw it with Ryan Grigson. He kept him on far too long. We saw what happened with Andrew Luck. I blame Jim Irsay for that in some capacity, Derek, because he could have fired him, but he didn't. He chose not to. And here we are with Chris Ballard potentially, destroying this kid's confidence. Again, I know we're going to talk about that. There may be a legitimate reason, and if that's the case, I understand. But here we are again, Derek. It's just the same crap here with this GM. And it's so weird how they went complete polar opposite as GM. They went from a GM that spent recklessly, that didn't care, like he just went and threw money at players, even if the players were far beyond their prime, but he couldn't draft worth a crap. And now you have on the flip side a GM who actually can draft a little bit, but will not spend in free agency. It's like, just kind of bizarre to me. But yeah, it's run its course, Derek. Chris Ballard should not be a part of this organization moving forward. If I am Jim Irsay, Derek, I said this a little bit, when I was reacting to what Jeff Saturday said. I think you just need to do a complete overhaul, like a scrub down, like a deep scrub of this organization. And you need to start with Chris Ballard. You need to get a new GM in here. And then you need to let the GM go from there. If he wants to keep Steichen, that's his prerogative. If not, We'll move forward. He can hire his own team, hire his own guys. Then they can decide what to do about the quarterback and all the other personnel. But I honestly think, Derek, that has to be the move. If you continue with Chris Ballard, I mean, Derek, we saw what Lucas Oil Stadium was like on Sunday. We saw that. Fans are done. If you look at social media, every single post that Jim Irsay or the Colts make, it's literally 99% of it is fans saying, this team sucks. What are you doing, Jim? What is the organization doing? Like, fans are done, man.
There's no positive outlook right now.
No,
I mean, this is
believes in this.
Been the lowest it's been since 2020 or 2022.
It's worse, Derek. I think it's worse.
It definitely could. I mean, like, at least you knew, at least we knew, Cody, at the end of the year, or even middle of the year, when the Colts only were 2-6 or something. And then we sat back and we were like, okay, yeah. I mean, let's start the draft talk early. We know that there's probably going to be a quarterback that gets drafted here after this, because clearly, I mean, and especially since we knew when Frank Reich got canned, we knew right away, okay, it's clear that there's going to be a new direction that this team is heading in, right? At least we knew that. Right now, I mean, you're right. We don't know the direction right now. And to kind of elaborate on the first point that Kenny made, he said, I don't think everybody is working as hard as possible. And obviously it's showing. Well, first of all, I mean, that's not a total indictment on Shane Steichen. It is a little bit to do with Shane Steichen. I will argue, it's also partly on Ballard, because Ballard and Steichen spend, a good amount of time with these players, right? And especially Steichen. And you're supposed to know if your guys are, giving 100%, they need to be. They need to be. And if there's guys out there that aren't giving 100% and they're not working hard enough, then that means that regardless of whether they're high-paid athletes or they're the best at their position or whatever they're doing, they need to be benched. They need to be cut. They need to be waived. They need to be all these things, because it's called accountability. You can't have accountability for the 22-year-old kid that's still trying to figure it out, but yet all the other players that your captains are calling out, and you're not going to sit there and say that those guys don't deserve the same punishment, right? So it is an indictment on both of them. It should be a fact that, Steichen needs to do a better job of making sure that his players are actually doing their best. And it's also a thing on Ballard for, I know obviously he can't predict later on down the road, he can't predict down the future on whether or not players are going to start becoming lazy, but you can choose to talk with your head coach and say, hey, something needs to be done here. If this guy we know is not playing well, and because we're doing it because he's not giving 100%, then show the accountability. You preach it all the time, but it's not happening.
Sounds about right. It's not happening. That's the Colts mantra, man, for the last half a decade, if not more, is you preach one thing, you do another thing. That's what this team does, man. It's been that way for far too long. And yeah, it's just time for a reset, man. I think we're all just kind of more than ready at this point. It's it's time to just start and have a new direction with this franchise, because this franchise, I feel like, Derek, you thought it had a direction, and then it completely goes back to just being rudderless again with no direction. So I don't think there's much of a controversy here. I think a majority of Colts fans are on board with that. It's got to change, man. I think there's a lot of issues with this team. I think Ballard being probably the biggest issue. But yeah, man, I mean, the record speaks for itself. The lack of success speaks for itself. You can only hide behind the excuse of different circumstances, because you could just make excuses all day long, Derek, if you wanted to, for Chris Ballard. But at some point, it falls on him. He needs to fall on the sword. It needs to happen. And I think this is the year, man. I think this is the year it has to be. I mean, I just don't think Colts fans will support this team. I think the Colts will lose a lot of fans, honestly, if they continue this madness and this carousel of crazy that this organization has been on for way too long.
Oh, yeah. And, I mean, again, it also comes down to Steichen, like, already potentially losing the locker room. I mean, that's the big question that we're having right now is, has Steichen already lost the confidence of the locker room? Because now you got the reporters asking the same thing. Like, how do you keep the guys like on the plan with this QB thing and everything else with how you guys have been playing, especially offensively? And, he even kind of tattled on himself a little bit. He's like, it's never been about one guy. It's the ultimate team game. And we just need to get better. And it's like, that's funny because 2 weeks ago, you made it all about one guy. You made it about Anthony Richardson, not about the rest of the team, not about Michael Pittman blowing 2 touchdowns, not about Tyler Goodson dropping a touchdown, all of these different things. Like, again, it came down to one player 2 weeks ago, Cody, and it wasn't. So going to Zaire Franklin here real quick, though. Last player that kind of said something before, everybody stopped. He said, there's guys on the team that need to learn how to raise their level of play. He said, oh, yeah. And I basically said, yeah, about your perfecting your craft and, how much time you spend in the building. And, it's not always about practice. It's about the other things, too. I mean, again, like it's showing, Cody. I mean, we've had our fair share of things that we've said about Zaire Franklin earlier this year. But I mean, I will never say that I think that he, doesn't care about the game. Definitely spends a lot of time preparing himself. But you're right. Like a lot of guys, Cody, seem to continuously always be hurt and always be lacking. And like, I wonder if like guys aren't spending enough time in the building getting treatment or getting their heads right with film and all these other things, right? Like, you get paid to do this stuff. If you're just treating it like a 9 to 5 and just going through the motions, then how good are you actually going to be?
Right. And you just kind of wonder, even like some of the young guys, like if it's setting that culture, because I mean, Derek, we've seen like from some of these young guys, like they haven't really done a whole lot so far. Like, right. Like we've seen that before with this team where some of these young guys, they really struggle to start their rookie seasons. And it just doesn't look good. Like, I mean, Derek, we talked about AD Mitchell a lot. Like, he really struggled, and just now he's starting to kind of come into form a little bit. Yeah. Is that just an indictment on this locker room? Like, and just the culture that's set here, where AD Mitchell, how many times has he run a wrong route this year, Derek? And like, if he had the proper accountability, is he actually starting to run those routes a little bit more? Like, is he actually starting to figure those things out? And I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that. But you know what I mean? Like, there's guys like that where you're like, they have routinely made wrong plays. They've routinely not done the things they need to do, right? Like you mentioned, Tyler Goodson. How many drops has he had this year? While yes, he's definitely had some plays, how many drops has he had this year? Derek, I never want to say, because we love Jonathan Taylor, but Jonathan Taylor routinely is getting hurt. How much of that is on Jonathan Taylor? As much as you don't want to admit it, like, is he part of the problem too? Like, is he not doing everything he needs to do? I don't know what the answer is to that. You talk about different players who routinely are getting hurt. Ryan Kelly is the prime example of that. He continues to get hurt. Is he not doing what he needs to do in the proper, ways that he needs to do it? Same with like Braden Smith, even. Like, he gets hurt a lot too. I don't know what the answer is on that. I'm not calling anybody out, but I'm just saying there are some trends here of some guys who are routinely getting hurt and aren't, being ready to go. So that is definitely a question mark that I have with this team overall, is like, are there players that aren't, like you said, living up to the standard, aren't coming in enough, aren't studying enough plays, aren't doing the things that they need to do in order to be excellent? And I know we talked about this a little bit off air, but we can mention it a little bit. Is that the reason why Anthony Richardson is not getting back in the game? Like, is that the reason why? Is because, yes, okay, the culture is bad, but also it's not doing him any favors either. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, again, Anthony Richardson's his own man. He needs to figure it out. He needs to do some things, obviously. But you said it already. I don't know if you said it in this episode or if you just said it to me and on Twitter, but the thing that continues to be Shane Steichen's like words with Anthony Richardson and why the Colts are staying with Joe Flacco is veteran leadership. Which when you hear that, you're like, that's bull crap. What are you talking about? But maybe if you read between the lines a little bit more, you say something's up with Richardson and his maturity. Something has to be. That's the only explanation here. Something has to be with his maturity, with his preparation, with him handling being the guy. Something's not right. And again, Anthony Richardson has to do it, and he has to figure that out, to be a guy. But is he not in a place to succeed to truly, coming in, become that guy because of the culture that's been here? Is that the case? I don't know what the answer is, Derek. But you see all these different things, and you're like, it does make sense in those ways that, there hasn't been that accountability, and it's been that way for so long. And so when young guys come in, they kind of just go with the flow, like they kind of go with the culture, and they never truly become the players that they could be.
Yeah.
Because of that.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is to that, but that seems like a logical thing based off of what they're saying, based off of what Shane Steichen has said about Joe Flacco and the quarterback, and what we've seen, the trends that we've seen with this team. And again, Derek, it starts with the GM. He's the one that assembles this team. He's the one that, hires the coaches. But it's Derek. It's so weird because it's like different coaching staffs, same results, same crap happening. I don't know. But to me, that kind of seems like it might be more of a GM issue.
I mean, it's no doubt that something needs to happen, because if it's just going to continue, to be the same thing over and over again, then yeah, I mean, something needs to change. But yeah, let us know, guys. What are your thoughts on these Colts captains coming out and saying these things about other players on the team and the status of the team in general? But that's going to do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you so much. As always, go Colts.